and welcome to the world of curiosities. My guest is Steve Dills, a well known paranormal investigator and director of Transcend Paranormal, which he founded in 2010. Steve and his team have worked with a number of historical sites, helping to raise funds for over 15 locations and organizations through paranormal investigations, events, and volunteer effort. Transcend Paranormal operates out of Central Virginia and often travels when necessary to assist clients. Steve is also the historian for the Ghost Finders, one of the longest running paranormal shows. He has recently begun filming, directing, and editing Eerie Encounters, a YouTube and Spirit Channel series that follows he and co-host his crazy co-host Chris Vaughn. We love Chris on preternatural adventures. Steve, welcome to the world of curiosities. And tonight we're just going to touch what are the 5 things that you feel are the most necessary to bring to an investigation. And this is for anyone that is thinking of doing this the pro, what I consider semi-pro. None of us are really pros unless we're getting paid for it full time, but we're all weirdos here, mister.
We're all weirdos. We're all weirdos.
Mm.
Gosh, all right. So, 5 things, top 5 things. Obviously cat balls. No, I'm just kidding. I think the biggest thing is, and I see people do this all the time, and it I don't know, maybe I just don't have like the cojones for this, but I always bring a trusted person. Maybe that's a person or people, um but bring your team, bring people that you trust, and not just like the first couple of folks that you saw walking down the street that you could coerce to get into your van, but people that are going to have your back. And I'll give you an example. The very first time that I got into investigating, um, I joined, I grew up having activity in one of my childhood homes, right? And so, of course, that like sparked my interest in the paranormal, and you know, got into college, and got my own place, got a car, and at that point, I was like, all right, my parents aren't going to worry that I'm not home at 10 p.m. Now I can like go and explore. And I was very much of the mindset at that time that like, okay, it's got to be late, it's got to be dark, it's got to be like close to 3 a.m. For ghosts and spirits. I'm young, I'm very new in the field, and so I joined the Richmond Paranormal Society. It's a large group here in Richmond, Virginia. At the time, it had a couple thousand members, and the way that it operated was all online. Um, Somebody would reach out to a location, find a spot, and say, "Hey, I was able to get 10 people into this location. The first 10 people that comment on this post get to join me." And so, me being a nerd, being in IT, I'm always like attached to the hip with a computer or something. And that also meant that I was able to get onto these investigations, right? So I would sign up, right? Somebody would post it minutes later. There's Steve. I'm me, and so I started showing up to some of these things, and I very quickly realized that first off, investigating is done usually in like pitch black. And second of all, I'm not seeing that many familiar faces. So I am now going into these locations that I don't know. I'm not familiar with, um, doing something that I'm still very new to, with people that I just don't know, and I don't know if they're gonna like beat me up and steal my pocket change, or they're going to help me if things go south. And so I very quickly realized that if I'm going to do this, I should probably have people around me that are like-minded, and that know me and know, if I'm myself, if I'm acting not myself, if I nail my head on something and I knock myself out, they're gonna, be able to do something, right? Somebody that I can trust. So I think the most important thing is bring somebody, bring a friend. You don't know not only from the paranormal what's going to happen, but if you're going into some of these locations, and I remember even like very early on locations that I went to where they had security patrolling some of these locations because they couldn't close or lock all the doors. They're afraid that people are breaking in. So bring a friend because uh, the living are much more scary than the dead, and you don't want to get yourself into a situation where you're cornered by somebody else that's there, a squatter or somebody that broke in, and now it's, just you.
Yeah, I always get impressed and horrified. It's a twin thing by, they call them urban explorers that go into the field.
Yes, oh my god, I love watching it on YouTube, but it scares the hell out of me. Like, that is I don't know how they do it, because I'm like, yes, I will go into all of the abandoned hospitals and the sanatoriums and the penitentiaries, but when they're walking through and there's obvious signs that there are people living there, I'm like, "Oh, God bless."
Yeah,
I'd
yeah.
be
Well, the living scare me too. I'll be honest with you. It's not the dead. And so and
nope.
we've talked about this before, this whole idea of, as you say, it said an a-hole in this life, an a-hole in the next life. And it's so true.
Be the next spirit of that location.
Say the smartest people are not the one that goes, go Yahoo, or the bravest people, okay, that go Yahoo and running into a location. Being cautious is not a bad thing. Let me say, based on your criteria there, that the second thing is good sense, having good sense, bringing that with you.
Yes. The second thing that I wrote down is bring your brain. Bring your brain and don't forget to use it. Because you get into these locations, and not only from a safety perspective, but you need to understand the environment and your surroundings. For example, you and I have both trampled through some pretty abysmal looking places, and some rooms are closed off on purpose. And sometimes they're not, but you can very clearly look in there and be like, "Oh, you know what? The foundation of that building is unsafe." Or, I see mold or mildew, something on growing on the wall, those sorts of things. And so I think it's very important to be aware of your surroundings and understand what that will do to you. I've been to a number of places where somebody will say, "Okay, well, the basement scares me the most." Well, you know what? A lot of folks have, claustrophobia, right? The enclosed spaces are scary. And you go into these basements and you got to like bend down to crawl through and everything. Yeah, of course you're going to be kind of scared, right? That makes sense. But be aware of the surroundings. Don't just say, "Oh, you know what? That's a ghost. That's paranormal." When you can rule that out, just understanding how the human mind works. Same thing with a lot of old homes and houses have unshielded wiring and ungrounded wiring. And so what happens with that? You get an abundance of EMF that over time can cause, and we know that high amounts of EMF and prolonged experience to EMF can cause visual and audible hallucinations. So you combine old building, old wiring, smaller spaces, creepy, dilapidated environments, and what do you have? Ghosts. Right. And that doesn't necessarily mean there are any. It just means that, there are things going on up here that we're forgetting to take into account. And that could also be the environment itself impacting you. The same thing with EMF. We also know that like mold and mildew, all those sorts of things can also create hallucinations. Right. And that's why like houses with black mold, right? You have black mold, what do? You evict. Right. You have to get it cleaned up. You have to get it all cleaned out, because if not, you start having issues. And so I think the second thing, like you said, bring your brain.
Be cautious. My husband is an engineer, and when he walks into some of these places, the first thing he says is that this is a biohazard, and he's right. We do have to be aware. In fact, I know of one, and this is such a sad story. This was several years ago, who had actually, I think, gotten an infection, a lung infection from bat guano, from having inhaled it. And remember that? And they had
Yep.
passed away from
Yes.
this. I mean, this was a very serious infection. And so you have to be aware of your surroundings. Like you said, understand that a lot of these old buildings are not being kept up. And so don't go into those areas that you might
Yes.
see dripping water and black mold on the walls. Go to another section of that building if you need to.
Yeah, or just take proper precaution, right? Like I've seen, we talked about urban exploration, right? I've seen people go into buildings that have been deemed haunted, but are completely closed up and lock and key, and they've just found a way to sneak in, but they're closed for good reason. One location in particular, and I'm not going to name names, um, I almost had access to, got thumbs of approval from their whole foundation. They went to their insurance company and they said, nope, nobody's going in there unless it's somebody that's checking the building to make sure that it's structurally sound, or they're going in for cleanup because people had gone in there and it was an older building. They started ripping the copper pipes out of the walls, and guess what? They were exposing asbestos in the tiling that they were ripping out, the walls that they were ripping, the ceilings, asbestos, asbestos, asbestos. And that is something that like I do not want in my lungs. I've seen the stories of people that have had that and inhaled all that asbestos, and that is not something I want.
So you're probably young enough not to remember this, but I think back in the olden days, probably when I was a baby, they were using asbestos in, I think was it Johnson and Johnson? It was one of the baby powders that they used on babies. I mean, it just they
Yeah,
did not realize how dangerous asbestos was, and that's why you find it, like you said, in so many of these old buildings. In fact, I would say that probably the Victorian era buildings are a little safer than something, say, built in the maybe 19 what, 30s, 40s, somewhere in there.
yeah, because they're mostly wood. It's majority wood. So it's just as you move into some of these newer, not newer, but 100-year-old kind of buildings, you can run into some of that issue, especially if people have gone in there and stolen things and ripped stuff out of the walls. There is a chance. So be safe.
So what's your 3rd recommendation?
To me, I think my third one, prior to going into an investigation, is for me, and this is not for everybody, but know your history. I am a huge believer that um, there is a connection between history and hauntings, and to to truly understand a haunting, you need to understand the history of a location, and that doesn't mean just the building itself, but that means the land, the people that were there, the furnishings, the decor, the objects, the things that were in that building. You need to understand the history. And I say that because, it's such a novelty idea to go to a location, see a shadow figure or a full body apparition, and scream and run back out, right? Or going somewhere and you hear something happen, you hear a whistle or you hear somebody talking, you get that adrenaline rush and then you leave. But from an actual investigation perspective, um, you're investigating, right? You're researching. The idea is to try to understand and build context around that. And I truly believe that if you understand the history, and yes, there's definitely going to be blackout windows of time that there's just nobody wrote down an experience, nobody wrote down something that happened in the day of the life of the people that were there. But knowing the history of a location, I think really, really, truly helps you build a bigger picture about what's going on and why. And I think that is the most important thing. Why is this occurring? Where it's occurring? I don't know. I feel like a lot of folks, especially when you get into entertainment, it's less about the history and more about just that kick of adrenaline.
But just to add a little flavor, as a medium, I never look at the history.
Yes, and that's why it depends on. And this goes into my next hint, but you
Oh,
continue,
no, that
please.
that's all I was going to say is, as a medium, in fact, Dr. Hans Holzer would always work with a trance medium, which is what I am. It's kind of an old-fashioned type mediumship. And what's really interesting is, well, not interesting, but it correlates with my thoughts on this, is that he would never tell them where he was going. And that way, because I have seen this,
Hmm.
I know people firsthand who I shall never ever mention who will look up the history, who declare themselves a medium. They will look up the history and they will have the most amazing sessions at that location. But here is the
Hmm.
thing, they're absolutely adding nothing. Nothing. It's a trance medium that you bring in that starts to
Yes.
filter. I'm gonna give you a quick example. I was at a seance at this beautiful old house, and like I said, I'm a trance channeler, and so I allow the spirit in. And when the spirit set, it was like, "Oh my gosh, this man was gay." Only he you have to understand, he was a scion of society in his town. This was a huge secret, but his family had found out about this, right? And he just kept crying, and basically that he had been declared the other, he had been ostracized by his own family, by society, and it was beat in him, don't ever let anyone know about this. And so when I did that, when I channeled, the man who owns the house told me, he said, "This makes such sense." He never married and he always stayed at that house. He never left that particular house because he shut himself off
Yep.
from society. But my point is there's nothing written about this at all. And you cannot add anything if you're just reading the history.
Yep. And I think that that plays very well into my next thing personally is keep an open mind. And I think that's important because that exactly highlights what you just mentioned, right? I am a huge investigator. I'm going in this from I want to know the history. I'm gonna look at the environmental data. I'm gonna try to make some correlations there, right? But that's not everybody that's on Transcend, and you know that being part of the team. We've got some 30 plus members, and it's just growing now anymore. But we all have our different things that we bring to the table, and we all have different ways that we investigate. You and I don't investigate in the same way, right? But that doesn't mean that we can't work together. And that's where I say keep an open mind to the possibilities of you know what's around us. And I again, I come bearing an example here that when I first founded Transcend, the idea was very scientific approach. We're going to look at data. We're going to be recording this and that and this and that, and completely disregard and dismiss anything that is more on the metaphysical side. And the more and more that I was exposed to other teams and other people, and met you guys, um, I realized that what there is something to this. There's more than one way that we can explore this field and this frontier, right? There's more than one way to skin a cat, and I don't think that you're doing yourself or the field um, any good by in a very similar vein, ostracizing one way of approaching the paranormal from another. So, when we investigate, and you know this very well, I go at it, I learn the history, and I bring audio recorders, video recorders, EDI, data loggers, all these sorts of things. But on the flip side, I've got you and Rhonda and Misty and Ashley and whomever, right, over here that don't know the history, or walking in completely blind to the history side of things, and just trying to see what they experience. And then I can take my historical context of knowing the location and say, what's really neat? What you just picked up over here lines up perfectly to the history. Um, and to me, I think that is one of the really this is one of the coolest things. I've seen that at St. Albans. I've seen that at Henricus Historical Park. I've seen that at Hanover Tavern. I mean, so many places. Scotchtown. y- So many places where if we just went with one approach, we would miss the bigger picture. We would miss that really, I don't know, that really really unique cool thing that now we have a bigger idea of what's going on and why. And I think it's important. You keep an open mind when you go and you investigate. Don't limit yourself to just one way, or belittle somebody because they're not investigating in your same style, because there are no experts right now. right? There's no paranormal professional or expert. Now, there's people that are experts in their
Mm.
respective fields that they bring to the table, but there's no, until I hear otherwise, there is no right way to conduct a paranormal investigation. So don't do yourself a disservice by saying this is the only way. There's tons of ways. We're all in this field together. There's tons of paths that we can walk, and I think it's important that we review all of it equally.
The fact that you know the history, like you said, and you bring that in, and then when you have somebody in the metaphysical, like many of the people on your team, then you can listen to what they have to
Mhm.
say, and you can click off that this makes sense or this event happened, and it adds such authority, if you will, to the medium's vision or what they're hearing, but it adds
Exactly.
elements like we've already talked about that you may not have known about. That brick that was missing out of the wall is suddenly there, and you understand why this person was maybe drawn to murder. If they were, if they're able to channel that
Hmm.
person and they're able to see through their eyes and feel what they felt, but you already know the details of that, and so if the meet in fact, I call this really the
Yep.
Hans-Holzer protocol or the Holzer protocol, because when he would go, he would bring, as I mentioned, the trance medium who had no idea where they were going, and he often used a witch, and she was a psychic medium. Her name was Sybil Leek. He worked with her. She was a British witch and very well known because she was one of the first ones out of the proverbial broom closet, but but
I like that broom
he
closet.
also said would bring a camera and a recorder, and you have to understand this was back a piece. I'm not quite sure how far back, probably the '60s and '70s, but that was the protocol that he'd set up. And you're right, we can learn from each other. The one thing, and I have to mention this, people who set themselves up and there's an inflexibility about them, say they're all about the science. And it's like, "Excuse me," but
Yes.
knowing the scientific method, the last step in that is replication. How in the world are you going to
Yep.
replicate this?
It's very difficult because when you think of the scientific method, you're thinking it's a laboratory setting. Well, guess what? You can't fit these historical buildings into a lab. You can't. So you have to adapt it and you have to meet it where it is. Um, and that's where I think that you do a disservice if you say this is the route, this is it. Well, guess what? I've seen some really cool things and found some really cool information that has fit perfectly to the historical context when I can validate, what a psychic medium is experiencing and what they're picking up, and I have that history as a validation, and
Mhm.
now we've got this really cool
I love
view
that.
of the
Okay,
past.
and what about the next one?
I think the last thing to me is just overall be prepared. Um, and I have done this, and um, you know, we have a team group chat. Pat, you've seen it where we're like, okay, how do we prepare? How do we go into this investigation? And then there's times where we try to wing it, and then we're like, man, I wish we would have done this. I wish we would have spent more time there. I wish we would have tried this method. I wish we would have done this or that, whatever. I think the biggest thing is be prepared and be prepared in every way that you can. So, I'm I think the important thing is know how long that you have at a location, right? Because you don't want to get there and then you've got 5 hours and now you're going to go take a smoke break real quick and you're going to go grab dinner. You're going to go to Rico's across from St. Albans and spend 3 hours sitting there waiting for them to finally bring you your food and a bill, right? And that's from personal experience. You want to prepare and be ready. And I'm saying, charge all your batteries, bring everything that you need, but also right size your investigation. I've seen so many folks go into a location and they spend more time setting up their sea of what I refer to lovingly as blinky light things. And they set them up they'll go into a room and they set up, you know, whatever, motion sensors over here, music boxes, 10 or 12 K2 meters, EMF detectors, whatever. And they spend like 15, 20 minutes setting up all the equipment, and then they investigate for 10 minutes, and then they've got to go somewhere else. Um, I think that as a whole, you know, prep and no, okay, I'm going to utilize this equipment, and I'm not going to bring, you know, X, Y, and Z over here because maybe I don't have time to set this up. It's going to take too long, or maybe I already have this equipment and this is just, duplicating my efforts. But knowing how you're going to approach the investigation, how are you going to investigate, how are you going to break up into groups, what's your timing looking like, all those sorts of things. Um, like I said, I've experienced this where we didn't plan ahead, or we didn't plan correctly, and we found ourselves, investigating, and then we've got to wrap up, and we didn't get to check out two whole floors of a building or an entire, ward, or another building in and of itself that we spent all of our time over here. We lost track of time, and then we didn't even get to go over here to this other building. Um, and I think that can't be understated enough is plan plan ahead. If that means having somebody that goes and digs up the history and then presents it to the team members that need it or want it. Um, but have a game plan. Know, I'm going to go here, I'm going to go there, I'm going to do this investigation or this methodology here, this methodology here. I mean, some of these locations that we've been to, we don't even have internet access. And one of the things that I love to do when we investigate is use music as a trigger, right? Because music, everybody loves music. It doesn't matter what era you're from, what generation, if you're from, the 1600s, 1700s, it doesn't matter. Everybody loves music. And it's important to have the right time, that right era of music as well. Like, I don't think the people from 1622 Henricus are going to care much for rap, right? But if I can find some music that is comfortable, that fits their time, um, then the likelihood that they're going to want to come and communicate to me seems like it's going to be much higher because I'm meeting them again. I'm meeting them where they are, and I think that level of preparedness, um, being ready ahead of time, will allow you to do those sorts of things and to get as much out of your
Let me
investigation as
mention, because I
possible.
have ADHD and you do too. Oh yeah, you're the
Oh yeah.
physical
Oh my
part.
God.
See,
Yes.
it's all going on in my head, and with you, it happens in your body too. What is the very basic equipment that you think people have to have?
Yeah. I think from the most. I mean, and I personally, I take this to the very bare bones. I am. I'll give you another example because I love examples. Right. When I started out in the paranormal, um, the very first piece of equipment I had was a flashlight. The second was an audio recorder. And that's because that's what I could afford on a college budget of $0 and eating ramen. And so, as I entered into the paranormal field and I looked around me and I saw, all these folks with all this equipment and they've got bags upon bags upon bags of things. And I'm like, man, I want all that equipment. I want that. I want that. I want that. I want that. And this might be another tip and trick, but um, I started, when I could, I'd save up money and I'd buy another piece of equipment, buy another piece of equipment, buy another piece of equipment. And a lot of it I didn't even test out. I didn't try it. I didn't put my hands on it before I ordered it. I just dropped $200 there, another $100 here, $300 over there, and now I've got this piece of equipment and I don't know what it does, and I don't know if I'm gonna like jive with it. I don't know if I'm gonna like enjoy utilizing it. I don't know if it's gonna work for me, so on and so forth. Um, I just bought and bought and bought, right? And so then I got to this point in investigating, and I've got a wealth, literally and figuratively, of equipment, and I'm bringing it to every investigation. So now I'm the guy with three, four, five bags and boxes and this and that. And first off, I'm not utilizing everything. And secondly, I find and I realize that there's equipment that I just don't care for. I don't like. and it just is for any number of reasons, right? It doesn't matter which. I just wasn't a huge fan of it. And so now I'm back to this place where I can't, like, if I would have just stayed on the straight and narrow, I am now using the equipment today that I used all the way back then, which is an audio recorder and a video recorder. And I think, to me, those are the most important things. I think that, and mixed with, and again, I'm data focused, right? So I love my EDI plus, the data logger. And so, to me, with those three items, I'm like, all right, I'm ready. Let's do this. Because with an audio recorder, I can record the sounds and everything that's going on around me. With the data logger, I can set that down and I can say, okay, um, you know, excuse me, this is the barometric pressure, this is the temperature, this is the EMF field and any differences and changes in that. It's got gosh, I can't remember the name, a geophone in it. So if there's any vibrations, anything like that, and I've got my video recorder because, or my video camcorder, because I can now, not only just videotape the investigation, but videotape the equipment to show that I am not interfering or interacting with it in any way to cause any changes or fluctuations in the data. And so now I can say, okay, well, I got an EMF on my audio recorder or my camera, right? And this EMF, or excuse me, this EVP that I've just recorded, at the same time I saw a spike in barometric pressure. At the same time I saw a spike in whatever environmental variable. And I think that, to me, creates this really neat tangible thing now where I can say, you know what, I recorded this, but I also have the data that shows, you know what, this happened at the same time. Um and and I think that the more we do that, I think it would be really neat, just overall in the field, to see a correlation and say, okay, is this really, this preternatural paranormal phenomena, or is this scientific actual experiences that we just don't understand yet? And I take that all the way back to, you know, the time of the Aztecs, when, they're sacrificing people, every day to make sure that the sun rises the next morning. As far as I know, we're not sacrificing. I mean, you didn't sacrifice anyone
I
today,
think you're
did you?
right.
Okay, I didn't either. I didn't either. So, but I am pretty sure that tomorrow
Mm.
morning the sun will rise, right? Um, so so I say that because I feel like the more that we're able to collect that data and build that analysis and that context, that we'll understand that, there is something tangible here. And having just those very basic three pieces of equipment removes the personal experience from it, where it's not just a story that I'm telling you that I've had. Now I can show you. Now I can let you listen to it.
Oh, this I gotta tell you, this rolls right into my last question, which I didn't know if it was gonna be on topic, but it just magically melded into one another. So this is my question, and I thought you're the perfect person to ask because you've been in the paranormal for so long, and you're
Uh-oh.
and you're an IT guy, tech guy. How do you think is impacting, or certainly going to impact, the way people receive honest and true evidence, when it's so easy now to just, through our words, create whatever we want?
I think I think when used right, and I think that this is a pretty standard thing across all AI use. I think it will be a huge asset. For example, there's a lot of, like, generative AI right now where it will take, and I've even thought of building out something like this, um, taking all of the data over all of the investigations that we've had. Like, let's say, you and I go to St. Albans, and for 10 years straight, every weekend we're collecting data, right? And then we can upload that data. And instead of you and I now spending another 10 years going through that data, we can utilize AI to go through and say, okay, you know what, I see this spike here, I see this spike there, I see this spike here, I see this
Mhm.
experience also correlates to that experience. And guess what, they were both at the same time, or they were the same lunar phase, or they were
Right.
same, whatever, fill in the blank. um and I think that we can utilize that as a huge, huge asset to speed up the review of some of this, right? To build these correlations where otherwise we just have, I mean, that takes a lot of time. I mean, you know as well as I do, you go to in a location and start investigating. You set up two cameras and you investigate for 4 hours. You set up two audio recorders. Now I'm not just recording 4 hours of the time that I was there. I'm now recording 4 hours of audio on this recorder, 4 hours of audio on that recorder, 4 hours of video over here, and 4 hours of video there. That is a lot of time. And, you know, time that we as humans just don't have because we've got so many other things going on. So I think that it has a great opportunity. I also think on the flip side, that it can very much so be utilized for misinformation or disinformation in the field. And I also think that while AI is still in its infancy, um, there is a lot wrong alongside a lot right. And I say this because it's utilizing what the backbone is, the internet, for a vast majority of this, especially if you're utilizing like Meta or ChatGPT. The majority of that information that they're pulling and reviewing is the internet. And the internet is like a double-edged sword. It's a great place for information, and it's also a great place for misinformation. And we see that, you scroll through Facebook and you see people just sharing things left and right, not actually reviewing the source if that information's correct, and so on and so forth. And now you've just created this perpetual system of information that, some of it's right, some of it's just vastly not right, but people aren't taking the time to review it, and now it's out there. And now AI is also reviewing it and saying, "Oh well, all these people said that this is right. This is right, right? This is right." And it's finding its way into, school aged kids, writing reports now, and like sending that in, and it's just vastly incorrect information. Um, Same thing goes with AI creating images, right? There's always, you know, at least ever since photography has been created, one of the very first things we ended up figuring out how to do was adding ghosts, right? Yeah, spirit photography. I can't remember the phantasmagoria, I believe is what it was called, referred to as, right? Which is the whole idea of ghosts being these ethereal, see-through beings. So, you know, I think that, as time has gone on, we have this just innate desire to fake things for some reason. Um, People, and that is a huge, huge thing. I think that dings the field, because you know I've seen people try to pass things off as legitimate that were obviously fake because they didn't know how to use Photoshop. With AI, it's so much easier now to fake things than it has ever been, ever. And so I think with it, with it, as Stan Lee writes, with great power comes great responsibility. I think we need to do our due diligence, especially as we move into the new age, this new era of technology, which is going to be vastly AI driven. Making sure that we do our due diligence
Mhm.
to understand what is legitimate and what is not, what is factual and what is not, and how can we utilize this information, this technology, to benefit us instead of hindering us.
So at the end of the day, do you think that one of the biggest things that's going to matter is the reputation of the investigator themselves?
Oh God, yeah. Oh yes, yes, without a doubt. I mean, and it sucks because you have people that come into the field with good intentions, and then I've seen a lot of people get starstruck, right? They see, people that are on TV and they're in movies or they're writing books for Amazon. No, I'm just kidding. Um, I'm just messing with you, Pat. But I've seen people where they're like, I want to be on TV, and for whatever reason, that original interest with what they got into the paranormal for, that sheer curiosity to understand the unknown is replaced. And I don't think people realize it sometimes. I think it's just they get into the churn and the idea that, well, if I'm going to speak at something, if I'm going to be asked to be part of something, then I need to be on TV because that's my path to being asked. Right. And it completely negates the fact that there are tons of folks that are working very hard to try to understand things, um, to bring to the table actual information. And so the hard part is when you go out there and you start getting on some of these bigger things and you sacrifice integrity for popularity, it's hard to get back to that integrity, right? It's hard to believe somebody once they've already lied to you. And I think that that is vastly important, and can't be stated enough that we have to come at this with as accurate and factual. Like we can't just you know go into some of these locations. I mean, I have people that will ask me, is such and such building active or haunted, and take St. Albans Sanatorium for example. We've been there a bunch. I have been there on a number of occasions where I haven't actually had any experiences. And then on the flip side, I've been to St. Albans when I've had some of the most mind-boggling experiences, right? Um, but that doesn't mean that I should go and say every time I've been to St. Albans I've had activity, right? And I think that's where we have to be very careful, um, to do honor and respect to the field and to all the folks that are in it. We should be as honest and upcoming and forthright as possible, and not try to fake things, because again, I think once integrity is gone, once it's lost, it is so
No,
hard
I
to bring
agree, and
back.
kiddos, never sell your soul for popularity or for a 30-minute or an hour show because it is
Nope.
never worth it, I promise you. And I will tell you, it is a lonely life
Mm-mm.
to be a writer. It is a lonely lo I would like to thank you, Steve, for being with us. It's always a pleasure having you,
Yeah, thank you for having me.
and until next time, stay curious.